Hi everyone, my name is Chelsea. Welcome to Little Mountain Ranch. Welcome to my kitchen. I am very happy to have you here with me today. We are going to make sweet crepes for breakfast this morning, and I thought I would show you my process for doing that. They are super easy, but they are also super delicious and my kids love them. The other thing that we're going to be doing in today's video, and this is something I am very excited about, is planting a ton of seeds. We're going to get really serious into planting. I haven't actually started any seeds for my 2023 garden yet. This is going to be the first big seed planting that with the intention of having these plants go out into the garden in the spring, and I am so excited about it. But before we get into that, let's get into making some of these crepes. Crepes have to be one of the easiest, kind of fancier breakfasts to make, which is nice because they don't take a ton of time and they also have really simple ingredients. So we're gonna use flour, milk, water, butter, salt, and I think that's about it. I have already made the whipping cream. So we're gonna fill these with whipping cream, and I don't sweeten my whipping cream. It just has a little bit of vanilla in it because I'm going to be using this blueberry syrup that I made in the fall, which has a lot of sugar in it. So we're going to use those for our fillings. I already have my cast iron fry pans well oiled, and we're going to be cooking the crepes in there. We are going to quadruple this recipe, and I will put the recipe down in the show notes for you. So we're going to use 4 cups of flour, and I always use my blender for making crepes because it gets the dough or the batter nice and smooth, and then I can just throw all my ingredients in at once and it mixes them up nicely. So 4 cups of flour. We need 8 eggs, so this is a pretty eggy recipe, but that is absolutely fine since I am getting lots of eggs now, which is just wonderful. I might have overshot this recipe a little bit for the size of my blender. We'll make it work. 2 cups of water. Oh my goodness, we are coming very close to the top of my blender. A teaspoon of salt. I need 6 tablespoons of butter, and I am actually just going to melt my butter right in the cast iron fry pans that I'm using. Add a little butter, extra butter flavor. A little concerned about how full my blender is here. So I am going to get this mixed up before I add the butter, and then I might need to add the butter and add this into a bowl and then mix it that way because this is potentially going to overflow. Normally I use my plunger, but there is not sufficient room in there to do that today. Aha, success. Okay, here we go. I have to just move a little bit of the liquid down there so that this can actually mix. I think we're gonna be okay, but it is going to be close. Okay, let's add our butter in here. Just gonna fit. It was close, but thankfully no overflows. Now comes the fun part. So I've just put a little bit of olive oil on both of these pans and then heated the butter in this one. So they're nice and well greased. I'm gonna set my oven at the keep warm temperature so that I can put these into the oven as they come off. So now you just wanna wait till your pans get nice and hot. Once the surfaces of your crepes start to look a little bit dry, like so, then you can flip them over. And you can make these thinner if you like, or thicker just by changing the amount of liquid that you add or just adding a little extra flour. But for a breakfast crepe like this, I like doing them a little bit thicker. Oh my goodness, the snow is just coming down out here. Can you guys hear all the birds? Even though it's snowing, oddly enough, it still feels like spring. It has been so warm this winter, besides that 1 week or 2 weeks that we had where it was cold. Outside of that, it has been above freezing, and even now it's above freezing outside. Pardon me, sweetie? I know, they're so yummy, aren't they? I'll make you one right now. There's whipped cream and blueberry filling and maple syrup. The other fillings that I absolutely love for crepes is cheese sauce with broccoli and cauliflower, turning them into a savory dish. It is so good. It was always one of my favorites growing up. So lots of whipping cream and some blueberry syrup. So with my blueberry syrup, I keep the blueberries whole so that there's a little bit of texture to the syrup. And then we roll it up and top it with some maple syrup. There you go, my dear. Enjoy. Okay, I'm just gonna put these crepes on the table, you guys, and then you can just go for it. Saturday morning, and on Saturday mornings at our house, instead of doing Saturday morning cartoons like I grew up doing, we do Saturday morning video games. So the kids always love Saturday morning, and usually we'll have waffles or pancakes or some breakfast like this on Saturdays. The kids are going to eat these as fast as I can make them, so I don't actually need the oven preheated at all.
I'll eat the frozen though.
So tasty. So I just went down to my grow room to get the trays for planting. And I found, let me show you what I found. Oh boy. Very sad, dead sprouts. So how did this happen, you might be asking yourself. So here's what happened. Yesterday when I came in here in the morning, it was around 24 degrees or so Celsius, and I like it to be warmer for my tomatoes, so between like 25 and 28 degrees Celsius, like nice and warm. They do well in those temperatures. And when the grow lights are on during the daytime, this room is well insulated enough that it actually keeps the temperature up high enough with just the grow lights that I don't need supplementary heat. The lights are on a timer up here, which means they shut off at night, and it was cooling off too much at night. So I thought to myself, well, I'll just bring a heater in here, which I did. But I neglected to notice that the heater did not have a thermostat on it. So I set it pretty low. But like I said, because this is such a well insulated room, it retains heat extra super good. When I came in, it was 35 degrees Celsius in here, which for sprouts, which only have between 3/4 to an inch of soil, is way, way too hot because it completely dried them out. Like completely. This one is not salvageable. These are crispy, so those are gonna go to the chickens. This one over here, I might be able to salvage, so I'm gonna soak it down. Fortunately, this one was one I was just germinating and it had a cover on it, so this one did okay. But I also think that my alfalfa is also chicken food. So that's kind of unfortunate, but a lesson learned, and I'm glad this lesson was learned right now instead of when this grow room is packed full of all of my plants that are going to go out into the garden, right? So we'll look at it as a positive. This heater is obviously not going to work. I'm going to need a thermostatically controlled heater for in here. But the one good thing is all of that heat worked perfectly fine for my little micro dwarf tomatoes. As you can see, they are flowering like crazy. And over here, what I did is I took down the shelf that was sitting right here and I stuck that on the floor so that I had enough room for these plants to grow. These lights, I can just pull these little pulleys and I can raise them up. But although these tomatoes are looking like they need a drink, They did dry out, but they did not dry out to the point where there's any wilting on the leaves at all. So I'm gonna go fill up my water tank and give everything a really good soak and bring these trays of very sad, dried out sprouts to the chickens. I am going to have water downstairs, probably in the next couple of weeks, but for now I have to haul it from up here. I am so happy with the way these little tomatoes are looking. They do not look very attractive underneath these purple grow lights that I have them under, but we're gonna have tomatoes soon. Do you guys remember when I went into the greenhouse to get potting soil a couple of weeks ago and I was coughing like crazy because of all the dust? So I got smart and I brought the bag up here and I am soaking the soil before I start messing around with it so I don't get all those little dust particles in my lungs, because that's not good. I'm gonna go throw on a t-shirt and get an apron so that I do not cover myself in dirt. I have a new apron, and this is actually one of our designs. My niece designed this one, and it says, "Grow flowers everywhere." And I'm really happy with the way this turned out, and I love the color. So now we are going to plant a whole bunch of stuff. Let me show you what we're gonna do today. We're going to plant lavender, snapdragons, some parsley, some sage, some daisies, lemon balm, and celeriac. I am trying to find my eucalyptus seeds. I don't know where they came in a package by themselves, and I put them somewhere and I cannot find them anywhere. So I'm hoping to find those by the end of today. They're really slow growing and I could have planted them in January. So I really want to get those planted. So hopefully I can find those. And then I also need some rosemary. I'm first going to run you through kind of the bulk of my seeds and what I plant in my garden. And keep in mind, we are in a zone 3B. We have a very short growing season, somewhere around the 3-month mark. If we're lucky, we have seen frost into June. We had a frost this last year on June 10th. We sometimes will get frost even the middle of August. So it is a kind of a short, intense growing season. I've been gardening for a long time, but on this property for 8 years now, and I feel like I have the rhythm of northern growing, and I am able to pack in a lot of growing in a very short period of time. I'm going to kind of give you a general overview in today's video, but if you want a really comprehensive list, you can go over to my website and I'll link that down in the show notes. And if I can, I'll put it up here for you as well. I plant a lot of root vegetables because root vegetables grow really well in a northern climate, and I do have a root cellar, so I'm able to store a lot of those vegetables in my root cellar over the winter time. So obviously tons of potatoes, which I will be using my own seed potatoes for, which are down in the root cellar right now. Turnips, rutabagas, beets, and parsnips. So several different varieties in here. So I'll run you through just a couple of the different varieties that I grow. But like I said, for a really detailed list of everything, you can go and check out that blog post that I did. And I also do quite a bit of seed saving myself. So I have seeds from cylindra beets that I saved, tons and tons of parsnip seeds. Parsnips are very prolific when it comes to seed production, and if you want to save seeds off of parsnips, you really only need to let 1 or 2 plants go to seed because they are so prolific. They are biennial, however, which means that they won't send up their flower stalk until the 2nd year. So what we can do here is actually leave our parsnips in the ground and they'll send up their flower stalk the following year. But if you live in a colder climate than we do and you're worried that maybe they won't make it through, you can always pull them up and store them. There's a lot of different ways that you can store them. You could store them in some peat moss, in a fridge, like if you have an extra fridge. That's a really optimum kind of temperature and humidity level for storing root vegetables. Or you can store them in a root cellar if you have access to that, and then replant them the following spring. But you do have to get them in the ground pretty early because they do take quite a while to get going. Oh, I was going to show you a couple of other varieties here. Helenor is always the rutabaga that I grow. And and purple top white globe turnips. I have 4 main places where I get my seeds, and I will put links to all of the places that I get my seeds down in the show notes as well. West Coast Seeds is a British Columbia company, but they do sell all across North America. But I have found that there are some seeds that they aren't able to ship over the border. So for you Americans out there, the 2 places that I buy my seeds are the High Mowing Seed Company and Seeds for Generations. They just actually lost their seed house with all of their stock to an electrical fire, which is obviously incredibly tragic and also really catastrophic for a small family business like theirs. But they are working really hard to get their seed stocks all back up. So I will link them anyway if you want to go and see what they have available right now just to support them. We have Ash's Heirloom Seeds, and that's the name of her seed company, but her farm itself is called Moonglow Gardens, and so I buy a ton of seeds from her as well, and she is doing a stock up. She is just a small family-owned business as well. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer for smaller companies like Ash to be able to restock their inventory, but she's in the process of it right now, and I think probably within the next week or 2, she'll have everything stocked up again. Okay, so what's next here? So that was the beets and turnips. For beets, I always grow Cylindra beets. They are a fantastic long, narrow beet that is really great for pickling. Squash is one of my very favorite things to grow. I love squash. I love to eat squash and I love to grow squash. So I'll pick out a couple of my favorites here. I won't show you everything that I'm growing because I grow a lot of different varieties of squash. But I'll show you some of my go-tos that I do every year. Pinnacle spaghetti squash. Victory butternut. Butternut is one of those longer season squashes, but I find the Victory butternut is one that I can actually grow here and end up with mature fruit. Burgess buttercup is my all-time favorite squash. It is so good. And then for summer squashes, I do Black Beauty and Goldie as far as zucchinis, and then Sunburst. Where are my little Sunburst cuties? Aha, there we are. Scallopini peppers, not peppers, good grief. Squash, scallopini squash. And I will show you a couple of the new ones that I'm doing this year that I got from Seeds for Generations. This is Jarradale. Isn't that a pretty squash? A pumpkin that I always grow is the Cinderella pumpkin. It is a really good pie pumpkin, and it grows really well in the north. This is a new one for me. This one is the Delicata Sweet Dumpling. Oh, I just get so excited even looking through these seeds. Oh my gosh, so exciting. I did pick a Romanesco zucchini that I'm gonna be trying this year. That's a striped, like a variegated one. So gorgeous. Okay, spring cannot come soon enough. I need spring. Okay, so that is it for the squash. Like I said, I grow many, many different varieties of squash, and I do have, I think, most of them listed over in that list in the blog post. So we'll put the squash over here. I grow lots of different herbs, and many of them we're going to be starting together today. The basil, I will wait and start probably around the beginning of March. One thing I want to say when it comes to start dates, I was over on a farm page from Alberta, and they are actually in the same zone as me, and they are starting a ton of things that I would not start this time of year. I think they're starting all their peppers, and I wait and start my peppers until the first or second week of March. And the reason for that is I have no idea, maybe they have a heated greenhouse or something like that where they can move their plants into a heated greenhouse, where I don't. I do have a high tunnel, which does extend things out by a little bit, but not enough that I can really push it that far. I want to just touch on zones right now. One of the things that I've learned in my years of gardening is that you can be in the same zone as someone else and have maybe a little bit of a microclimate within that zone. On either end, either a microclimate that is colder or warmer than the people around you. So for instance, I live in a zone 3B. So do my neighbors a couple of kilometers away from here, but they have a microclimate which actually gives them almost 2 extra weeks of grow time every year because they're by the river. And so if I were to talk to them and say, oh, when should I start my seeds? And they tell me their dates, those are not going to necessarily work in my situation. So you can use those zones and climates as a kind of a base to go off of, but it really does just take experience to figure out what works in your particular garden. So you can take the start dates that I'm giving you today and then adjust them according to your situation. Kale, oh, that's another one I love. Kale and cabbage, both. So great. So these are seeds that I harvested from my own abundance kale. And I have red acre cabbage, green acre cabbage. For kales, I have Ducabor. That's a standard one for me. Very dense, curly leaves. Oh, here we go. There's the scarlet kale. Isn't that beautiful? So pretty. This is one of my favorite cabbages. It's called Dedden. And terrible name for such a beautiful cabbage, but it is a purple cabbage with the savoyed leaves. So kind of the curly leaves like that. And then the inside of it is like a lime green color. It's really good. This is a long season cabbage that usually doesn't come to maturity until October-ish. It tastes better with frost, but it does need a little bit more time. I'm able to pull it off up here, but I don't get really big heads like I'm sure you would in a more southern climate. Corn is a little bit tricky to grow in our area, but I found a couple of varieties. One is called Candy King that grow here. We did also grow our own popcorn, and it's called pink popcorn, and we saved our own seed from it. So we're going to try replanting our own seed and see how that goes. One of you lovely souls sent me Bodacious sweet corn, early Sunglow sweet corn, and oh, that's another Bodacious sweet corn for me to try. So these are short season varieties. And then I have this absolutely stunning one that I am so excited to try. This one's called Painted Mountain. Isn't that absolutely beautiful? I have always wanted to grow beautiful colored corn like this, and this one is supposed to be a short season, so hopefully it will work. Once we get into planting, I'll show you all the different things that I do to try to extend out the season so that I can grow corn. Last year we actually got quite a bit of corn, and I think we canned 7 or 8 jars of corn from our own corn patch, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot for us in the north. I was really, really excited about that. Oh my gosh, I haven't even gotten into the tomatoes yet. I love tomatoes too. So I have Bull's Heart tomato. I'll just run you through a couple of the varieties because there's tons of them. Sungold is the only cherry style tomato that I think I'm gonna grow this year. I'm not crazy about cherry tomatoes, but they're kind of nice to have at least a few. Amish paste, that one is a really good one. I grew tons of those last year. Tomatillos, you need 2 tomatillo plants in order for them to cross-pollinate, but tomatillos are great. And then Manitoba Bush is another fantastic northern tomato that I grow every single year. And then the last one that I grow every year are these beautiful old Germans. It's like a big slicing sandwich tomato. So good, really sweet and very beautiful. And for carrots, Bolero is my go-to. Canada is another one that I also really love. I have lots of carrot seed from our own carrots. And all of these seeds in this box are ones that are harvested from our garden, and they are mostly all flowers. So tons of sunflowers, zinnia, lots and lots of zinnia, calendula. Calendula are really easy to seed save from if you're new to seed saving. I have become a convert to having flowers in my vegetable garden. It has a couple of purposes. It brings in the pollinators, which is great, but what I love is it adds whimsy to the vegetable garden and some color that I think is so beautiful. So last year I actually grew entire rows of zinnia in amongst like my cabbages and my squashes, and it just looked absolutely beautiful. So we have sweet alyssum, we have honeywort, which is a really beautiful plant. The first time I planted it was last year, and the bees love it. Zinnia by the hundreds. I love zinnia. I have all different kinds of zinnia. Canary bird zinnia, lots of chamomile I'll have in there, tons of different kinds of sunflowers. Look at these beautiful ones. Zinnia's gorgeous. Barney's giant mix zinnia. These ones were sent to me as well. Just flowers everywhere. I like putting them everywhere. So this is why this says grow flowers everywhere, because I love flowers in the vegetable garden. Okay, I think that is enough of going through the seeds. Like I said, over on my website, you can find a comprehensive list that has all the varieties, and I tried to make all of the links clickable so that they're really easy for you to find. I'm going to start with planting snapdragons. Snapdragons are one that need a good 12 to 14 weeks before they get planted out into the garden. They're very slow going, and I think I'm going to grab my sprayer and soak down the soil first, because with these seeds, you just put them on the top of the soil and barely pat them down. So I don't want to dislodge these little tiny seeds with a heavy spray of water. Okay, these are very, very, very tiny seeds. So just a couple on the surface of the soil here. So instead of seeding these in these larger cells here, I'm going to fill up another one with the smaller ones and do those, because they do not need such big cells. So I'm just going to slightly tamp these down. So this one is sage. The lemon balm is one that is only a 6 to 8 week before your last frost, so before you're going to plant it out. But my plan is to start my lemon balm now, and then I'll pot these up into pots, and they will go in my window in the late spring and then move out onto my porch. So I don't mind doing them a little bit earlier than I would if they were going to go out into the garden. It would not hurt these little tiny seeds to put a plastic dome cover over them until they germinate, but that is not something that I ever do. I don't know why I never do it. I just don't. Okay, some German winter thyme. Thyme is sometimes perennial in our area and sometimes not. So I always plant some. I'm being pretty liberal with these seeds as far as the amount that I'm doing, because they are older seed and the germination rate's probably not fantastic. Italian oregano, also sometimes perennial. And again, these are like minuscule. You see how tiny those seeds are? Tiny, tiny. And whenever I am putting my, my little tiny seeds back into their packages, I always do it over top of the cells that I have them planted in. And that way, if I spill any of the seeds, it just goes right into the cell that they're planted in, so I don't waste them. Okay, next up, let's do some parsley. So this one is another 6 to 8 weeker, but I would like to have some early parsley. So I'm going to do some now, and then I will do some more that will go into the garden probably the second week of March or so. I love parsley, and I want to freeze dry a ton of herbs this year. So I'm going to plant way more than I normally would. And then some English lavender and And lavender is one of my favorite herbs. And some lavender, and we're going to do lots of lavender because lavender is marvelous. So kind of the rule for thumb for seed planting is to plant your seed to the depth of the seed itself. So as you can see, these are pretty tiny little seeds. So I'm going to just barely cover them. I'm gonna have to be careful with the amount of flowers I'm doing though, because I'm going to fill that grow room up with tomatoes and peppers by the second week of March. Okay, and in these last ones over here, I'm going to do celeriac. This is what celeriac looks like, and this is another one that stores really well in a root cellar. It's very, very slow growing, very slow to germinate, but I grew them last year for the first time and we really liked them. 12 of these. We're going to load our freeze dryer up again in a few minutes, and I'll chat with you a little bit about the freeze dryer and kind of our experience with it so far. I haven't talked a lot about it because we honestly haven't used it a ton since we got it, but we now have kind of wrapped our brains around how we want to use it and kind of what our goals are with it. And so we are going to have it running pretty much all the time at this point moving forward. Okay, I am going to pause now and take a lunch break, get everybody fed, and then I'll be back with you again a little bit later and we'll do some freeze drying together. Okay, lunch has been all had and now we are going to do some freeze drying. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about my experience with the freeze dryer and my kind of learning how it is going to fit, or how freeze dried food is going to fit in my overall food preservation kind of plan for the upcoming year. So the first thing that I've kind of learned about freeze drying is that, for me anyway, the flavor of freeze dried food outside of liquid stuff isn't my favorite thing. So even when it comes to fruit and things like that, my kids love it, which is great, but I'm not a huge fan of it. I much prefer either frozen fruit or canned fruit as far as for flavor and texture. But I really do appreciate the longevity of its storage ability, of freeze-dried food storage ability. One of the things that I struggle with when I think about long-term food storage, so when I say long-term, I'm referring to storing food after 1 year, is because I have a large family, the sheer magnitude of the task of storing that much food. Number one, where on earth would I put any more than 1 year's worth of food for my family? I can't even imagine that. And also, just storing that much food for my family is a full-time job, usually from around April all the way until October. It is a lot of work to put up that much food. One of the benefits of freeze drying is that the food takes up very little space. I'm going to show you when we go downstairs how much, I think it was 5 squash that I did, how much space that actually takes up in my storage space for my freeze-dried food. It is remarkable and it's very exciting for me. And then of course there's the added bonus of the fact that freeze-dried food lasts for a very long time, for up to 25 years, retaining 95% of its original nutritional value, and then longer, just slowly losing nutritional value over time after that 20-year mark, which is absolutely fantastic and kind of blows my mind a little bit that I have that type of technology sitting down in my basement. I'm so grateful for that. So what I've been doing is thinking about the types of ingredients that I would like to have in my long-term food storage. I'm basically going to approach my long-term food storage similarly to the way that I approach my short and medium-term food storage, so that up to a year mark. And that is that I am going to store ingredients to make meals with. So when I'm talking about ingredients, I'm talking about things like ground beef, things like milk, chopped up veggies, things that I could use to make a meal with. So I could make a huge vat of soup if I had a freeze-dried bag of, say, chicken, cooked chicken, mixed vegetables, some potatoes, and then also some soup stock, and I could throw that all together and make a huge pot of soup for my family. So basically what I'm saying is that I am looking at the freeze dryer as a way to preserve food for my long-term food storage layer. And that's really exciting for me because that's been so far out of reach for me in my mind that I haven't even really been thinking very much about it, but it is something that I would love to have. Kind of all tied into this way of thinking about freeze drying is my garden plan for this year. I'm really having to rethink how I plan my garden because normally I grow enough food to sustain us for a year. But now that we have the freeze dryer, I need to grow extra food so that I can freeze dry for the future. So that means some more garden space, most likely. I have a few spaces in my garden that I don't necessarily use to their fullest capacity that I could pack more food into, but we're probably gonna have to make some more garden space so that we can grow more food that will be used in the will be freeze dried and then used for our long-term food storage trays. So I would recommend, if you are going to get a freeze dryer, that you get 2 sets of trays. And the reason for that is it's a good idea to pre-freeze your food. It shortens down the amount of time it spends in the freeze dryer if you pre-freeze it. And if you're using your freeze dryer a lot like we are, then you can have one batch in the freeze dryer and then you can have another batch that's freezing waiting to go into the freeze dryer, and you can keep it cycling through that way. And that way you don't lose the time that you're having to put trays in, wait for them to freeze, and then put them in the freeze dryer. I already set my freeze dryer to cool down before I put my trays in. So now we're going to open it up and put my trays in, and then I'll show you how I'm gonna fill these right in the freeze dryer. I'm just pulling out the tray a little bit, and then I'm going to fill it up till it is just over half full. Carefully slide it in and do the same thing with my next one. Okay, so I have clean trays here. I'm going to do these mini marshmallows. I am definitely not an expert at freeze drying, but kind of the basics that I've learned so far is just to make sure that everything is a single layer, and that when you're freeze drying things, that the majority of the things that you put into the freeze dryer should be around the same size. So I'm going to do this whole bag. I am also going to freeze dry some grated cheese along with these marshmallows. So I'm just gonna go pop these into the freezer. The cheese is actually already frozen, but since the freeze dryer is going to be going for another 24 hours or so now at this point with the milk in there, I am going to wrap this up, put it in the freezer, and put it in our next cycle. It is now the next day and the freeze dryer is done. I've pressed the warm tray option, and now I'm going to take out our milk. This is the first time I've done milk, so I'm kind of curious to see how it is. So that is how it looks. So now I am going to defrost. That's just incredible to me. Amazing. So this breaks up so easily that I'm not going to bother putting it through the blender the way that I did with the squash. It broke up fairly easily too, but I really wanted it to be quite powdered. But this, I know once I put this in the bag, I'll be able to just crush it up in the bag. We bought a case of bananas. And so next up, once I am done with this, I will go up and wash these trays off, and then I'll fill them up with bananas and I'll get those freezing while the cheese and the marshmallows runs through the freeze dryer. So I have my oxygen absorber. I'm gonna put that in there. This is just a heat sealer. You could even use a hair crimper. I've seen people do that, but this one came with my freeze dryer. And voila. All right, friends, that is it for today's video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.